Good afternoon, everyone. Today we've got a recap of the weekend, a look at the Titans faltering, and the Shock recovering.
After that, we'll get into Carpe's 4,000th kill in the Overwatch League and followed shortly after by the unified hero pool.
I'm Jayne, this is Avast, and welcome to Contested. What's up, guys? Once again, as usual, no surprise here. We are not coming to you from the Frontier Communications Studio in Dallas, Texas, but instead coming from our respective apartments and or homes in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So, actually, fun thing of Avast, I realized there was a last Friday at around like 8 p.m. or something. All of the people came out onto their patios or their front porch
Yeah,
of
I saw
their
you tweet
house.
about that. I was
Yeah,
wondering. I'm assuming it was for like medical workers or
yeah, it was
public.
for the
I'm assuming
medical
it was
workers, but it was
yeah.
just like everybody was out there playing music, like holding up boom boxes, like it's an old school movie. But yeah, everyone was going nuts, applauding all the healthcare workers. So if you out there are working in the healthcare industry, thanks to you. And I guess on Friday we're holding parties for you. But how are you holding up during the quarantine, Avast?
It's about the same. Honestly, I feel like I very some people can't handle the lifestyle. I think at times of being locked inside, but considering that for like a large portion of people that were heavily involved with esports, they spend a lot of their time inside anyways to begin with. I'm not gonna bring out like the broken old like tired cliche of like I'm an introvert, blah blah blah. Like I'm just it's just an easier transition,
Yeah.
and it's also easier if your job is also able to be done from home a lot more easily than, or not more easily, but like about the same amount of ease than it is before when you were having to work in an office. Obviously for other people that can't do that, that would be tough. But I've settled in. There's just more plates in my room which you can't see. You can't see them. They're
Yeah,
stacked
it's
up to the
there
side,
and there and there.
but
That's just
but they're
everything
definitely
out of
there.
frame. Yeah, no, most of us were doing social distancing before it was cool, at least those of us who work in esports. And hopefully, regardless of whether you work in esports or anything else, if you are watching on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, welcome, welcome. You can see your comments, say hello. We'll say hello to you as well. Or if you're watching this pre-recorded on your favorite podcast platform, like Apple or Spotify, hello to you as well. Hoping you're having a fantastic day. Now, before we get into the full topics, we actually have a new sponsor segment today, which this is either going to go really well or disastrously
I'm going for very well, Jane.
very
I think
well.
this is gonna go very well. I think.
Okay, so Favor is getting us to do a 60-second recap of the weekend. Now, I've actually spent the time to script out a 60-second recap, but I have not timed this. So, bets on how is this going to be like 5-minute tangent? Who knows? But welcome to the first ever trial run of Favor's 60-second recap. So happy Tuesday to everyone. Here's your 60-second recap brought to you by Favor. Starting off with the Atlantic Division, the Three Stooges once again fought amongst themselves to try and prove that they aren't completely terrible teams, with the Houston Outlaws snagging 2 wins against the Boston Uprising and the Toronto Defiant, respectively. This catapults the Outlaws up to a blistering 14th place in the standings, which is somehow still above 4 of the other Atlantic teams. As for the teams that lost the matches, the Boston Uprising and the Toronto Defiant, both of them had changes coming into their roster, with Boston releasing their popular rookie support player Swimmer, and Fefe has retired as head coach from the Toronto Defiant. So changes are coming soon, but changes that aren't likely to make them better anytime soon. On the other hand, the hope of the Atlantic Division, also known as the Philadelphia Fusion, asserted their dominance against both the Paris Eternal and the Atlanta Reign in 5 games apiece and cement themselves as the best team in the division and made them contenders for the best team in the league as a whole. But what about Vancouver, you may ask? Well, it's probably better if you're a Vancouver fan that you don't ask about the Titans at all. 2 embarrassing losses against the Hunters and the Charge is going to raise a lot of questions about this year's roster, but with Slime and Haxel nowhere to be seen, there's at least some room for experimentation and improvement whenever they play next. We'll get into that and more in the rest of today's episode, including the Shock smashing the Gladiators. But for now, that has been Favor's 60-second recap.
Beautiful.
I have no idea how long that was, but
That seems just about 60 seconds, give or take however much time it might be over or under. So give or take however much time that may be. But I that was snappy. I liked this line in particular, actually. I like this line that since you have the script right here in front of me, which is this catapults the Outlaws up to a blistering 14th place in the standings. That was just it was great. I like that a lot. And I think it also it's just it sort of leads us into our next point. In a way, so now that we've done the recap, is that The Titans. The Titans have they are not the Titans. You've heard of the movie Remember the Titans. Well, in this case, we are not remembering the Titans. There's no remembrance.
You know what the
whatsoever.
worst part about this is that like the games from Overwatch that I've been enjoying are the ones that I'm watching more for like comedic purposes. You know, it's kind of like I watch the games that are going to be funny, like you know the Toronto versus Boston, the Houston, you know those are the games I watch. And I really thought that the Vancouver Titans. You know, we talked about it last week with the power rankings. Vancouver Titans was sitting, what was it, number 1 for Reinforce's power rankings and number 2 for ours, right?
Oh, Pepe laughed. Pepe
I
laughed.
was like, I'm not gonna watch these games. Vancouver's gonna smash.
Well, no, I didn't put number 2 for Titans. I did say you could argue they'd be there. I didn't put them number 2. I said you could. It was an argument to be made. I technically went the chicken route, you know, and I technically actually ended up. I don't think I technically put a placement for them. So really, I'm right either way. I've hedged my bets.
True. You are never wrong with your power rankings.
Big brain. If you never actually create a power ranking.
You know, technically the asterisk on that was that both of us said that there wasn't enough information, and we'll see. But I don't think we'll see would be getting 3-0'd by the Charge and 3-1 for the Hunters. You know, me being kind of the owner of the largest amount of Hunter stocks, I think known to man right now, is super happy that they played against the Vancouver Titans, got that 3-1. And also what blew my mind is they were starting to look like an actual Overwatch team with actual coherent strategies, playing by the book, and actually looking pretty clean. And then Vancouver Titans themselves were the ones that went off script, playing ridiculous things, and then just, I don't know, more or less giving up in map 3. So I'm super happy as kind of like
it's always
an
a question
investor
of how
in the Chengdu.
clean they look compared to how, you know, not clean the other teams look.
Yeah,
know?
This is true. Is it just them making Chengdu look really good, just based off of how awful the Vancouver Titans were? Yeah, I don't know. It could
because
be.
Because it is shocking, is it not? I mean, well, obviously we'll talk about, you know, speaking of shocking, we'll talk about shock later, but they went from being, and it was 100% not unfair to say they were a team that everyone expected to be very good coming into the season, and they still came out swinging through the gates and looked pretty good. Like it was a close game versus Gladiators, but Gladiators have shown they're a pretty good team too. So there wasn't anything to indicate that this team was going to plummet, like just and splat in this sort of manner. But also, I mean, I have heard some fair counterpoints, and you do have to consider them that Shock lost 2 matches.
Yes.
And they did get rolled in those matches too at times.
And
so,
at this
I also
point,
don't think it was the same scale.
Yeah, at this point, the narrative around the Shock, and we'll get into the Shock more later, is that, you know, those 2 losses came when Moth couldn't play Lucio, and so far they've looked a lot more cohesive as a team. You know, they've had their DPS pick up as well, and Vancouver Titans, I've been reading some of the threads because I'm like, ooh, you know, it's always fun to see fan bases melt down and trying to rationalize things like this. And so far, 2 of the big things that have been coming up is, well, first of all, we'll just stick to it. The hero bans this week, Diva and Ana. How much did that actually hurt the Vancouver Titans? How much is this just a phase? You know, they went for some pretty off-the-book things with kind of like dive with Brigitte Zen into double shields and things like that. You know, they didn't have Slime and they didn't play Hoxel. And Suminsu was being a little bit more flexy than he usually does. How much of that is actually kind of reasonable for kind of justification of why the Vancouver Titans lost, and why if it's just like rambling excuses and the Vancouver Titans are really in for a hurt? At least the fans are.
It's just a phase, Mom, okay? Just because I lose to the Hunters in a 3-0 and give up, it's just a phase because Ana wasn't allowed. I mean, that's kind of, no matter what you can say, that teams definitely get hurt by hero pools in different ways, right? Yeah. I would argue in particular another good example of that would be, and is Dallas, who didn't, when they have to play Decay on things that aren't his traditional hero pool, they get hurt by that because then Decay is not his hero pool.
Absolutely.
So they've just been forcing him on Tracer and things like that. And there have been other examples of that as well, where like Hunters, obviously they get a little bit hurt if Amon doesn't get to play ball. And, you know, there's just, if you take away hero pools, it does hurt a team. So it's not unfair to say that it isn't favorable for the Titans, but it is crazy to say that the hero pool drops you from like top 3 team potentially to middle the pack or bottom 4, right? Like that sort of performance can't be excusable by a hero pool unless they're just so wholly unprepared, to where then it's no longer even a problem with the hero pool, right? It's a problem with the team in general to be that poorly prepared. And then the second point, obviously, of where is Hoxel? Like, where is this guy? He was really, really good last year. He's also, when you think about it, was clearly much more oriented as a flex player than Suminsu ever was. So it just seems odd to never see him in these games.
Yeah, it is super. because he played both of the games to start off with the Vancouver Titans when they won. You know, he even played a little bit of Genji and made the fans super happy with that performance. But you know, to see him and Slime not in at all, it makes some questions about why. I don't think that's really. It's we don't even know when they get to play next either, because this weekend we've got games Thursday through Sunday, but we're not seeing the Seoul Dynasty play still. So Seoul Dynasty is still kind of like question mark whether they're first on the leaderboard. Vancouver Titans very much definitely not in contention for top three
Not
teams
right
anymore.
now, no.
So and then Philly, we'll talk about them in a little bit as well, but like. We don't even get to see these questions answered. There's still so many unanswered questions about the league right now in terms of standings, in terms of like what is going on with the Titans. Why is
when will we ever
play?
see New York play again? Is another great example. Like New York has sort of entered what the Hunters were previously, where everyone was sort of worried about. Everyone was really worried about where was the Hunters going to, how are they going to play it all? Because when the quarantine first break out for COVID, they were stuck in China. And all the other teams had either gotten out of China to go to Korea, or the Korean teams had gone to the US. And then they're like, okay, well, the Hunters actually are going to be okay because they've lifted a lot of these restrictions. So they can start playing a little bit, and the teams went back to Korea, so that the regions are relatively equal. But now we're in New York, who's in their lockdown order, and they don't have the PC available or the internet capability at their apartments, and so they can't get to the practice facility. So it's just mind-boggling continuously to just talk about where the teams stand, because now we've also gone to a regionalized format. Like I don't even know where to begin sometimes to think about it. So you just throw out the power rankings. You're just like, this is what I believe. It's what I think, and
It's really our best guess. Yeah. So in terms, I know that there was some rumors, not rumors, but I suppose just some commentary from people who knew more about the inside of the Vancouver Titans last year. We're talking about Sumin Su and Slime being very both intelligent players. People who worked with Sumin Su in the Contenders region were said that he was basically somebody who worked at the same level with the coach, coming up with strategies. I don't remember. I can just Google this very quickly. But what team was Sumin Su on when he was in Contenders? I want to say Blossom, but I feel like that's really wrong.
That seems right. That seems right. Here, you know what? We'll all check. We'll all check right now. We'll all check. Here, look. You hear me typing, clacking on the keyboard.
Was it Kongdu? No, Runo? What?
It was on. So Sumitsu's actually had a pretty interesting career. They were in NA for a little bit with Simplicity, and then they went to Runaway. Then they went to Runaway after 2018. So they were actually with Runaway.
I thought he was.
I don't know what I'm saying. He.
Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else then. But yeah, Sumin Su and Slime. Slime missing is one of their best support players. Slime. It's like when you talk about the Vancouver Titans players from last year, each one of them, especially with how dominant they were looking, could have been considered as like one of the top players. But I really found it interesting, and I really should have tried to find this article or blog post from last year where they talked about Sumin Su being one of the kind of like player coaches in the ways that he's really helping coming up with strategy and making sure that they adapt. And in the retirement post from Fefe, the head coach for the Toronto Defiant, he talked very explicitly about he's retiring for a number of reasons, but one of the big kind of motivators for him to retire is the fact that the hero pools moves the game away from his preferred coaching style, and he doesn't feel like he's nearly as effective. So there is the potential for teams that are more player driven, not only to kind of coach themselves to find the initial answers to these compositions in the game, but also once you're actually on the field and you see what the opponent has, because the value of scouting and preparing specific counters to your opponents has gone way down, almost to zero, I would argue, because, if you tried to prepare against Chengdu, well, you just absolutely got smashed this weekend, and that was the case from the Titans. But with these hero pools and the crazy variety of compositions and adaptations that are happening, trying to prepare for specific opponents just doesn't happen anymore. When I was on the Dallas Fuel last year, we would get to the points where you would watch for very specific rollouts on each and every single map. You would time it down to the second. Like Space is going to be on the flank on a Paul Sanctum at this time, so you move these guys here to catch him because this rotation takes 2 seconds longer for these people to get into position before these people get in position, and you can punish that. Stuff like that just doesn't happen anymore. There's no giant VOD reviews of old matches because you're playing on the same map and they played it here, or this map is similar. Like, none of that happens anymore. And if you are a coach, which, from the sounds of Fefe's retirement post, that is the case, then, you're really hurting. The strategy and tactics that you were using to give your team an edge have just evaporated
So you
pretty
think
much
that
overnight.
that Pajan, because or Pagion, I think is actually the
Yeah.
pronunciation. I think what he used to be. He was the head Titans coach last year, but and it used to be a Fusion Uni. Do you think that they are currently struggling with that same problem?
I think Pagion and even Harsha, both of them are very kind of like qualitative coaches. They work in terms of the people on the team, and this is something that was pretty well talked about when Pajan also worked for the Fusion University team. Like when they were doing Pajan was kind of not the one who was setting these really intricate strategies or anything. That's not his coaching style. He's much more of kind of like the player coach. Things like Kai always kind of get talked about. Kai was not another person who didn't really go into super detailed strategies. He was more like work with the players as people sort of thing. And that can help, I suppose, in terms of keeping your team together and cohesive. But on the field, you're really going to need these more A-type leaders like Slime and like Sumansu to actually call the shots and adapt once you finally see what the opponent is doing. Because when you're a coach, you don't get to talk to the players during a game, and you only get about 30 seconds to a minute to talk during like the break between maps. Maybe that's changed once we're doing these quarantine measures. We don't really know what kind of coaching they're allowed to have or have. Could you even enforce it? I guess technically with this quarantine, you could have the coaches just looking over everybody's shoulders and talking to them, and nobody would know the difference. But that's actually something I don't know about how the league's functioning.
Yeah, I think coaches have come out on public record and said essentially that like they get a lot of the same breaks, but they're monitored because they still use the team speaks, right? And so
Yes.
they put all the players in the team speaks, and so since they're all separate, you pretty much can just monitor the team speak for when the coach comes in or not. And I think that's sort of how they're doing it. It's a very similar structure, but then the coach comes into the team speak and then talks to the team, and then they have the refs in there to like sort of monitor that situation. So it's similar, but obviously it's not the same, right? Because you're never really gonna have the same impact, obviously, from online versus in person, and it's a lot harder to get your point across and identify things. I feel when you're working online, um, but it really the core issue here for a lot of this is just Titans as a team might be experiencing what teams in the past I have had where they were very, very good at one particular meta style or one particular style of play in terms of like we identify it, we move forward, we play it versus adapting on the fly. And this could be where their weaknesses are exposed in that point is that, yes, you still have to be a very good team and it still requires to be very good players to come out on top and good staff to come out on top. But it's not necessarily the same skill set 100% because it's no longer refining metas. It's quickly seeing how you want to play the meta and hammering out your base strategy as fast as possible versus building that like for Runaway, for example, because this is the core of Runaway that's been in Titans for a while, minus some like minor changes. It's the same team that have been playing together for like 2 years or
Yep.
more. And it just it just throws a curveball in how you view metas and how you view play in Overwatch and in over the Overwatch League specifically, where everyone is already so good and have a lot of the same baseline resources. And you have to ask, where are the playmakers now for Titans? Because we've seen them make big plays, but if they're not making big plays now, then is it just the team that set them up for success and that these players really aren't that adaptable? Or is there like some sort of deeper issue at play here within like at a structural organizational level?
So we saw the shock. They kind of, tripped and fell, and we'll talk about them next. But they've come back and actually returned to form a little bit. And the narrative that's forming around the fact that they really were hurting from the lack of Moth Solucio, the kind of cohesiveness that gave them and the aggression, as well as probably them not taking things nearly as seriously as they probably should have during week 8. But what's your prediction for the Vancouver Titans, having watched the games this past weekend? Are they in for long-term hurt, or are they going to take this week's walloping as a wake-up call and return to form the next time they play?
I mean, I would say that they're in a very similar situation to the Shock, how they looked when their losses happened, because Shock were pretty lost in terms their comps were nonsensical at times in the rotate and their
There are a lot of
substitutions.
similarities.
They're but the difference is for Shock is that it very clearly from what happened from when we watched the game and from what sort of came out post that week for the Shock was that they had the wrong scout on the meta And they also just messed up with how they were doing substitutions. They didn't want to really pick a core. They were kind of just plug in, like swapping them out. And some of it was accidental, some of it was on purpose. And that hurt them badly. While for the Titans, it's like, yeah, I see some of those similar issues, but when I watch the games, they like I mean, you brought up best of that certain maps. It looks like they just gave up. It looked like the difference between the Shock and the Titans was that yeah, both looked Shock looked defeated towards the end of their losses, but they didn't look like they had almost given up at times.
Yeah, and there is kind of, that it's very possible that they were like, okay, boys, we got it wrong for this weekend. It's like,
Yeah, they could have done that.
They could have done that. It's like, it's too late for this weekend. We'll get them next time. And just,
But based off their play, I don't think Titans are in the same position as Shock. I
no?
really don't. I don't think they are. I think looking at how abysmally they played then, and because also you have to take into account the fact that it's the Hunters. I can give passes to Charge.
Don't you slander the Hunters?
I mean, I can give passes to those teams, Like when Shock lost to Gladiators or even to Valiant, I was like, okay, Gladiators are looking really good, and Valiant has ups and downs and look to be somewhat consistent, but Hunters are Hunters. And so I don't think they're at the same level. I think Titans are going to have a much bigger adjustment period than the Shock, seeing how their performance was during this week.
Speaking of the Shock, they 3-0'd the Gladiators this weekend after not looking so hot there back in week 8. And against the Gladiators, I think the most heartbreaking thing about this entire match is we didn't get a post-game tweet from Deepay.
Yeah. Well, he generally doesn't throw out the tweets after he's lost.
No, he doesn't throw out the tweets after losses, which is really hard. He threw out the tweet against Dallas Fuel after he beat them, but people were throwing that back in his face this week. But yeah, so 3-0 against the Los Angeles Gladiators. And that is kind of, at least the story, the part of me who really likes stories was super, super hoping for the Gladiators to actually break out this season. This was the season for the Gladiators to go and be something other than a gatekeeper for mediocre teams, which is something that, at least in my memory, the Gladiators has basically always been. They've always been a team that's kind of like really solid at just, punching mediocre teams. It's just like, you are not ready to be in the playoffs. Whap, whap, whap. But they've always really kind of just dropped the ball against really, truly upper tier teams, which as of basically this week, the Shock are now being
It's looking to be about the same. I mean, I was looking at their match history again. And I was just remembering. It's like, yeah, close game versus Titans, beat in Shock, then get rolled by Seoul, have rolled Fat Dallas, and then get rolled by Shock.
Yeah.
So I don't see their trajectory is set just yet. We're still pretty early in. I don't think their trajectory is at all set. And they might still end up in a very much better spot, because before they were always like a top 6 team, top 8 team, for sure. Never lower than top 8, like top 6 at times. Now they're looking like they can contend for like top 4 at points.
Yeah,
at points. I no guarantee, right?
Yeah.
I don't think they are going to be a top 4 team necessarily, but they can at least look like they're in contention to actually sort of break into the next echelon of teams.
A few lucky games, a lucky match in play-ins. Yeah, sure.
So but the real narrative here is that Shock has bounced back, or at least they're appearing to bounce back, and they're looking much more dominant, because that was a dominant series they had versus Gladiators. Gladiators never really looked like they were in control at any point, and Shock had been continuing to bounce back, the week before that. On top of that, so overall, their trajectory is moving towards as some people have said, the glide slope of success, where you're just drifting on in back to sort of where you're at, where you want to be. And there's no reason to really doubt them, because even though they are in a similar position to Titans, unlike Titans, Shock won the Overwatch League. Shock looked extremely dominant in that season too, and most of their players also went on to go win World Cup, which I don't know. You don't necessarily can put like extreme value at the Overwatch League level in the World Cup, but it does give you like sort of that extra like sort of a spice melange into the team, where if you win World Cup, then it shows that your players can also be consistent outside of their team environments and against other top level teams, like specifically the South Korean team that was at World Cup. So it's kind of hard not to doubt where they're going at this point, and rather just a flub versus Titans, who looked worse at times than Shock, even though they had some of the same problems and also didn't have the same history the same quite like as big. Like, okay, here's all the extra fortifying and padding that we can add on to Shock in terms of World Cup, in terms of winning the Overwatch League. Now, obviously, they went to finals, but they kind of got slapped in finals. So, it's just not the same like pedigree in terms of like how you can predict the team, even if they're in similar circumstances.
And I definitely think that the Shock, even from last year, have made some improvements. Like I had no idea that Ans even existed before he had the Overwatch League, and now he's just murdering everybody and teabagging the entire Los Angeles Gladiators. Like, they've got they do, at least on paper, I think people were looking at them and seeing that they really did improve from having won the Overwatch League, and maybe that's why the week 8 was as surprising as it was, but back to form here.
I mean,
But
Ons has to. By the way, I just have to say, Ons is Striker made it, or not Striker. Sinatra made a tweet. He said Striker's going to be MVP, and Ons is going to be Rookie of the Year. Is what
yeah,
Sinatra said.
yeah.
And I like how the Sinatra is also. I think that's both supportive, but also essentially clarifying that he's just as a spectator now. Like,
Yeah.
it's like both at the same time. He's like, Sinatra's like, oh, these guys are so good.
And it's
You're
not
not
like
gonna see me.
Sinatra is washed. Striker and Ons have had some of the highest highs of any players
Yeah.
this year
Ons
so
is
far.
looking crazy. That guy, I
mean,
doubted the logic of him, but he looks really good.
Yeah, he looks fantastic. And then Striker in a few games looked to be, it's hard for anybody to look like a superstar hard carry, but there were times though that Striker would look to be hard carrying the Shock. So both of them have just looked fantastic. And it's not like Sinatra is washed. It's the same sort of question that we have with the Atlanta Reign. We don't know why they're playing Baby Bay over all their other superstar DPS, but Baby Bay is
Still
popping
working.
off. It's still working,
right?
still winning games.
But I mean, Ons is on another like level right now. Like watching him play, he is like transcendent at times in terms of like the shots that he hits. It reminds me of like the first time I watched Defran play. When really not watching play, the first time I was rolled by Defran. And Defran was like, and I was playing, it was like Kings Road, the classic selfless map. And he was on Soldier running around through the high ground. And my team was pushing in. This is still when Quad Tank had just finished up. So everyone's still trying to play tanks. And Defran's just rolling you as you walk in. And you're like trying to contest him. And he's beating like 600 HP Diva with like 400 armor. And you're like,
what?
And you're just like, I don't even know how to respond. So that's how Ons feels to me right now for the Shock, is that seeing him play, when also you have to keep in mind that the level of competition is so much higher now in Overwatch League than it used to be. And just in general. And also that the particular meta is no longer a my DPS have free space forever type of meta to do things. It's very still like death ball oriented, where your DPS is going to feel a lot of pressure at times, whether it's from May Walls or from Diva or from Orion or for double shield halting you. And he still feels as if he's sitting in an open field just firing shots for free at times. And I think that's like an incredible position for one of your DPS players to be in if you're the Shock. So he is looking like a potential Rookie of the Year candidate if his performance keeps up. If. Big if.
Okay, so we've stroked the ego of the San Francisco Shock enough. They're back to form. We hope to see more of them. They're playing, I think it's the Fuel next week, are they not? They're playing, only one game next week, and against the Fuel. They're probably going to win that one.
Probably. That's not unfair to say.
It's the Fuel's recent success has been continued against like
mid-table teams,
the Justice.
Bottom.
Dallas have looked better, but it's they're not gonna
it's
well
not a comparison. I mean, who knows? Dallas fans can rejoice if they show up and they're just like, wow, this is.
I mean, they took a map off them again the first showing, and I think that if you take a map or two, or at least make things close, you can kind of keep the justification that Fuel are at least mid-table. But no, I wouldn't hold your breath if you're a Fuel fan.
Especially with Brigida gone in this next week of hero bans, because Brigida really enables players like Decay to pop off because he can play the Tracer or some other like flanky hero because of the armor packs, but she's not there. And with that probably means that you'd be kind of foolish at times to run anything like that. I mean, you can try to make it work, you can try to force it, but against a team like the Shock, it's going to be hard. Speaking of hero pools.
No, we haven't talked about the Gladiators yet.
Oh, we haven't talked to Gladiators. That's true.
We talked about them being a gatekeeper team, but I wanted to actually get into more of the reasons that the Gladiators didn't take the win. We talked about how good the Shock was and all the things that they've changed, and they're good players. But I think the support line for the Gladiators definitely looked like they were trying to do more to enable Birdring to carry, And Birdring wasn't getting a lot done. You saw a lot of immortality fields being used on Birdring to try and help him carry or just to try and save him if he over-engaged a little bit too hard. But they definitely were going more for that like short-term, high-risk, high-reward play. And the words are hard. The support line just wasn't nearly getting as much done. Birdring, I think they're putting a lot of effort into him to try and get him to carry, but against better teams or there aren't these cracks, I think that if you go against these kind of longer term fights where things are based off of kind of either resources or just teamwork, they definitely they went with the wrong approach this week, I think. And then we also saw OG looking a lot weaker than he had in the previous games.
Yeah, I mean, and also part of it was definitely just because like Shock were sort of just running over his team. You know, as a main tank, it's tough to look as good if your team is getting run over at times, including yourself. Like if you're not getting the support you need when you're investing those resources, like you talked about into Bird Ring, you're not investing them to OG. And Gladiators is very much like they are the definition of like an no, not really an Olympic sprinter because they're still in very good shape. I would say maybe more like a defensive lineman, you know, where like in the NFL, if you're just a big guy that runs really fast for like 100 meters, and then they're out of breath and they're done. They're done after that run. And that's sort of Gladiators where they'll plow through you with the initial burst of just momentum that they have and the aggression. But if you get far enough away to kite the aggression or you stabilize it and get like a counter pick or just like block them off, that's where they start to fall apart a bit, is because they're so reliant on that explosive energy out that once the fight slows down and it's much more of a, okay, we're waiting for an isolation, we're waiting for a pick, in terms of just looking at each other and positioning, that's where it seems like they've started to lose their way a bit against like teams like the Shock who come back up, because the longer the fight runs generally, the better it is for Shock.
Absolutely.
As opposed to Gladiators who are just so reliant on, we get the initial pick and we keep going and we roll over them.
Yeah.
And that just really just shows the difference in team like strength.
Yes.
Because team strength is not just about being able to roll over people, but also being able to play slow and still win the long fight.
And I think this also goes to show you kind of the power of these Lucios. You know, we've talked about the Los Angeles Gladiators do these very map-specific, comp-specific kind of takedowns where they're trying to do very specific things, kind of like executes. But if it fails or break down, things are not going to go for you in the long term. They're very much short-term strategies trying to win very quickly. But on the other side, San Francisco Shock, first of all, isn't really that weak of a team that they're going to get caught off guard by this. But with Moth back on the Lucio, whereas other teams might try and fight against you or not recognize what's going on, I think that a lot of the traps were subverted just based off the Shock's positioning and rotations. If things really did get in trouble, which was rare, they were very quick to react to it and move in a way that the setup for the Los Angeles Gladiators didn't even work. And with Big Goose being, you know, much less of the team style Lucio that Moth is and being much more aggressive, you know, he was going against Ons. And I think that he really underestimated and didn't nearly give enough respect to Ons and got picked off quite a bit. So the two Lucio styles not only just individually made a difference, but also on the team level really gave the Shock the advantage.
And you know, leading in past that, and we talked about it earlier, and we're talking about just what we're seeing is insane peaks of skill and insane plays overall. Carpe, Carpe, and it leads into our another new sponsor segment for us, which is the Poppin' Off presented by Jack in the Box, because we have to talk about Carpe getting his 4,000th kill. Or 4,000 final blow. Technically. And in the Overwatch League. And he got it as a Torb with a turret. He didn't even, it wasn't, which is the funniest part of it all. It was like, because on the broadcast, they get the kill and they zoom in on the turret and it's like shooting and it gets the pick and he gets the final limit. It's like, woo, 4,000. It's just insane to even think about that this is the 4,000 final limb in the Overwatch League, and it's by Carpe, who's been this explosive, once again redefined him, or not redefined, but has proven again this year that he is sort of looking to be a franchise player already, one of the first few franchise players. And you know, I mean, Tucker's handed him the keys of the kingdom or something, whatever. Like maybe Tucker's like, here, Carpe, take my super yacht out to the, you know, whatever it may be. Like Carpe is looking to be one of those early franchise defining players for the Overwatch League, and he's broken this record. And the person that's closest to him after that is Prophet, and who's still lagging a bit behind, and obviously is at a bit of a disadvantage because London haven't gotten to play in a bit, and in addition, London also might not get to play for a little bit longer because of the quarantine measures. So it is a little bit unfair to Profit at times, but also you can't take away from Carpe because that is an incredible achievement to be the first person to do it with such a, just explosive way, and also do it such a funny way to get it with the turret kills the final one. And as someone that was a Carpe doubter post season 2, because I was like, oh man, like I don't know if this guy's worth the investment because he
I
just
was
looks so bad in goats.
I
But
was a
then I
Carpe
realized,
doubter early on as
yeah,
well. I'll admit
yeah, like
it.
it's not we Carpe doubters. You're allowed to come out of hiding now, okay? I will be your shield. It's fair to say you were a Carpe doubter. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Just because if a player has a really bad season, sure, it may have been goats, but you're still allowed to be like, well, is this guy really the guy that's going to be our franchise player? It's fair to say, and I will be the one to take the flack for that because I think it's a fair criticism. But Carpe has proven that it just goats wasn't the fusion meta, it wasn't his meta, and as long as he can play the shooty, clicky heroes, which includes Torb, then he's someone to watch out for continual pop offs because that is an incredible feat to have.
And I'm going to just save ourselves from the YouTube comments and be your shield for a second because you mentioned that the reason Prophet wasn't playing as much was because he was on London, but he's actually now on Seoul.
Oh, Soul.
Soul
Yeah,
Dynasty, which
Soul.
is only
I'm so
played 2 games.
my brain it's gone back in time because I'm thinking about these old. Yeah, you're right. Soul. That's right. But it's still the same thing. It's the Prophet is on. They've only played 2 games with Soul.
Yes,
And
it's the same
who
reason,
doesn't
just a
play?
different team.
Yeah, same reason, different team. So it is still like unlucky at sometimes, but it doesn't diminish Carpe getting that final blow and doing it
Absolutely.
and being so incredible and once again showing that he is a force to be reckoned with, like during this season and moving forward, hopefully for that team, for the Fusion in general.
This is kind of the first time that the Overwatch League has put emphasis on kind of one of these more arbitrary barriers. I never heard about the 3,000 kill mark, the 1,000 kill mark, but I do kind of like it. I hope we see more of these metrics. Whether what is probably the most interesting metric other than final blows you would want to see a statistic
Most deaths.
on? Most deaths.
I want to see most deaths.
That's good. Oh man, I was thinking that it was
fair,
like.
I think that stat is gonna be. It would still be funny no matter what, but I find it hard. Pretty much it's going to be reliant on a player that's played multiple seasons. It can't just be someone that played one done.
It's got to be stats that are based off of per capita playtime, not absolute playtime or something like that. We could do KDA, but then that would be IDDQD with the infinite, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense at all in that scenario. You would have to be an impressive amount of deaths. Like if you were to tell me that somehow season 1 Shanghai has a player with that's competing for the most deaths still in the Overwatch League after the 3rd year of his existence. That's a stat that I'm interested in. I'm interested in that stat because even though it's no longer really a relevant storyline, it's still incredible to think about.
Wait, can't we find that statistic? But yeah, the first person who comes to mind is going to be Otto. Probably not for most deaths, but certainly most losses.
Yes, Otto. I think Otto's in there because of his streak of teams going from Shanghai to Justice, and he moved to now Spark, right? So. Yeah. Which is an upswing at least for Otto, but those stats could be really interesting moving forward. Besides just the Mimi stats, but other great stats, I think are going to be stats that are based around really maybe not so much absolute heal percentages, but sort of those very impactful heals because I think they have a stat for impactful healing, like healing that really defines fights, and but I can't remember what it is or what it's called, but you can get a really good grasp of who is the most balanced Lucio player in terms of peeling for his team and getting kills for his team and things like that. There are much more interesting stats besides just most deaths that can go in there. Most solo kills I think could also be interesting too.
So I can't find a statistic for the most number of absolute deaths, but the highest number of deaths per 10 is actually going to Ben Best, and that's with 12 hours played. The only other person who comes actually close to that, well, nobody even comes close. Everyone else in the top 10 has less than 7 hours played.
Wow.
So Ben Best with over 12 hours played still has the highest deaths per 10 in the entire league.
Very good. Very
there
good.
You go.
And it's funny too, considering that he's actually better this season. He's actually looking to be not a liability as a player. I wouldn't necessarily still put him as.
Yeah, he's not beast levels of liability and bad.
Well, it just goes straight for the throat there. But it is a hero. It is someone that's looking a lot better. And also, I guess that ties into that a bit is Ryan is gone. Ryan is gone next week. And, we're sort of defining that because we're talking about Beast and we're talking about Ben Best. And Ben Best obviously been playing a lot of Ryan and played a lot of Ryan before that because they've changed the hero pools again. Because this isn't just the hero pools changing for the week. quote unquote
They've changed the
unified.
format entirely.
They've unified it. No. Use the Borg-like terminology. They've unified.
Unification.
They've collectivized the hero pools, which isn't.
They have assimilated the hero pools.
Assimilated them. You know, they have made them one, which I don't think is wrong.
You don't think it's wrong? I mean,
no. It's not wrong to have one hero pool.
Okay. I was like, what are you talking about? Yeah,
the methodology.
They have assimilated the two versions of hero pools into, I think, potentially the worst possible version of a singular hero pool that they could have come up with.
Yeah, it's sort of how it's also because it's so characteristic of like a lot of the decisions that have been like, because like, think about it, like teams wanted bans, like they wanted a pick ban system like League of Legends, and then like let's say, and then the league was sort of like, well, I don't know, like Team 4 was like, I don't know if do that, but you know what we'll do? We'll ban them for you to where you have no say, and then it's randomized, and it's like, okay, well, it's better than not having them, but I mean, you know, it just seems like it's like me going to get a pair of shoes. Like I need a new pair of shoes, and the Foot Locker employer, wherever you may be, is like, we'll get you a new pair of shoes, but you don't get to pick the size, and you don't get to pick the color. And I'll be like, well, I guess like the soles of my feet, the shoes are falling off, and like I really need a new pair, but I really prefer to have one that fits me and I like. But I guess I'll take it. And that's sort of how I feel about moving forward with each of these decisions now, with the unification of the hero pools too, because like, okay, we've unified the hero pools, but now it's based off ranked, and I'm like, people like Genji had a 15.3% pick rate based off these hero pool lists. He was eligible to be banned. Now, to be fair, Mei was banned the previous week, but how? Like what? Like, excuse me? And Genji when has Genji been played like maybe 3 times total in the past like 2 weeks?
And it's been played by teams against really weaker teams when they want to do dive. Like the Titans did it, New York did it, Jinmu did it.
Chengdu played it a little bit, but I don't remember if they did it this past weekend. But they
haven't done it recently, but they did it in the past. But yeah, you know, it's like, you know, there is a massive world of difference between ranked and Overwatch League, and to base the bans off of Overwatch League or to base it off of Overwatch Ranked is just
it's mind-blowing, because it's like sort of like, because also it's still just, it's compromising in this weird way of like still the worst, almost the worst of both worlds, where it's like we want a singular hero pool so everyone plays the same game, but it's the same game that is like the sort of the dumbest form of it, because it's like based off ranked, where, and Sideshow brought up a really great point about this, was that no one in ranked wants to play Mei or like very meta heroes that are extremely good but aren't necessarily satisfying to play for a DPS player in particular. They want to play Genji, they want to play McCree, and so there's going to be this loop, this feedback system, is that like the heroes that everyone wants to see played are going to keep getting banned
because that's what people
in ranked won't stop playing them, and then so like it'll just be this cooldown system of like, it's, which is sort of like how it is now, but we've almost always had like one of the heroes that we sort of liked. Like there was still always like McCree or maybe a soldier or something, and then Mei was banned or Reaper was banned.
Yeah. The way the bans worked for the league was that they would ban what's powerful, and then eventually, you know, then the powerful things were very rarely the fun things, unless you're talking about like Nanoblade stuff or Beyblade from like really early Overwatch League. But yeah, you get to the point where like the motivations to play heroes are completely different, and it's the things that are really kind of more or less irrelevant to how strong they are in competitive organized Overwatch being banned. And there was, I'm going to transition a little bit here, but Chu, the head coach for Team Envy, so the Dallas Fuels Academy team, actually went on a little bit of a Twitter rant about hero bans. So if you wanted to know what one of the professional coaches still operating within the Overwatch world thinks about it, I just want to read some of these tweets. So the start to this little tirade starts on April 9th, and he goes, dude, teams getting one ban each would be so interesting and just enough to spice Overwatch up while keeping it incredibly competitive. 4 random bans with not enough notice is anti-competitive. And there's a lot of capital letters used in that tweet. And then he spams a tweet with just please, 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 please. And he says, the option to target the option to target ban a team or player if you scouted well or remove an integral part of meta compositions gives teams interesting and unique strategic edges while still giving fans what they want. Don't even get me started on how much better scrims would feel. What do you think about that?
I mean, it does from a competitive standpoint. There is like, and we've talked about throughout the day. We've talked about when we talk about all teams like Titans. Is that when we've brought up all these points after point after point, and Feifei's retirement, is that it's not fun from a competitive standpoint to have. It's not as fun from a competitive standpoint because it's once again this weird middle ground where it's not teams getting to decide how they play and their style, right? It's an arbitrary third party, whether it be Blizzard or in this case, you know, Genji God 72 on ladders playing Genji every single game, and now you don't get to play Genji ever again or see Genji, even though but May Reaper is going to be going to be meta for eternity because no one's going to pick them on ladder, right? And so it's just not as engaging, and it does take away that strategic aspect, and it is stressful for teams and for coaches. But on the flip side, I've also seen arguments, and people reply to that same Twitter thread of like, but then everyone's just going to ban the same stuff and play mirror comps all the time, and it's like honestly, I don't even see that is technically, I think there is truth to that because the simple truth is for metas in Overwatch and for metas in any game, it almost always trickles down to like the most easy to execute and the least amount of risk comp that is similar in previous styles of metas we played, right? Because Goats was meta all last year. And what did we go to? Reaper May. And obviously there are unique reasons for that because Reaper May both have high health pools, they have high escapes, and you don't run a lot of risk of running them because they can make plays very easily and escape like flanks or situations where they should get caught very easily too while having high health. But it's also still a very similar style play that Goats was. But at the end of the day, like maybe then the issue should not be teams shouldn't get bans. The issue should be the game should be more balanced, right? Like the issue should be maybe we should have more heroes. Like sometimes it's okay to have heroes also that do similar things, but we can have but are slightly different. Because take for example League, and I know you probably know a lot more about this than me because you play a lot more League than me. Is there are heroes that accomplish very similar goals in League with slightly different kits, but are still about the same. Like they
Mhm.
do very similar things, like where the whichever lane they may be or the role may be. But in Overwatch, only particular certain heroes do one thing.
Yeah, and
There are
I
no
think
heroes similar to them.
I mean there were some for the longest of time I've been preaching about the need for a diva replacement, and I think people thought that Sigma was going to be that because of his kinetic grasp, but like the combination, for example, of high ground like vertical mobility plus the defense matrix capability put together makes that character so incredibly powerful in a very large amount of situations. It's not just like I think one of the other things is that with the lack of characters, Riot's balance philosophy is very different from Blizzard's, and the fact that Riot is kind of like the game is balanced is if everything is overpowered, right? If everything is overpowered, but it's only overpowered in one specific way, then a lot of the strength comes from being able to actually force the game to play out in a way where you are strong and the opponent is not. It's like that old Sun Tzu quote, it's like don't fight where your opponent is strong, fight where you're weak, or fight where he's weak, sort of thing. If you can choose where the battle happens, like where the important stuff matters, whether it's going to be mashing into each other and fighting for resources or controlling space on the flanks, that is much more of like a league thing to have not only multiple characters be able to accomplish the same thing, but also multiple characters being extremely overpowered just in very different ways. And there are not enough heroes in the game. There are overpowered heroes in Overwatch, but there's not. It's almost like a catch 22 in the fact that there's not enough overpowered heroes. Where if somebody's playing an overpowered character that plays in manner A or something like that, then you could play in manner B, overpowered in that direction, and then it's whoever makes their way work best. But right now, it's kind of like whenever something is overpowered in Overwatch, it's usually like one of the only things that's overpowered, and everybody has to go to that because if you don't play that, you lose, and then it does get into those mirror matches.
Because there's no other May character, right? There's no other May character. There's no other Reaper character. There's no other Winston. There's no other Ryan. There's no other Diva. Like those are the singular characters that perform those functions. And also, before we get too far along this, I'm putting an asterisk here, saying I do think the game is probably its best state it's been in a while
True.
in terms of the
Yeah.
overall balance,
Very much true.
and they've added a lot of quality of life functions. This is more of just the rant of it could be better because you never have to settle for like how it is, right? You can always say like, oh, this is good now, but I want it to be better. And this is the point I'm trying to make. And also, this is a uniquely Overwatch problem that still hasn't been solved by all these quality of life changes, and that people like you and myself and others have brought up of that. There's still no other heroes do the same. Other games see perfectly fine building heroes that are or champions or agents and Valorant or whatever it might be that are unique but do just similar things. Because then you have a multitude of play styles, and then if you remove one, you still have one that can do something similar, but it's different and it's not the same game. But in Overwatch, there is no overlap between a lot of this. There are and the overlap that does exist are on like the roles like Hitscan, which are the most easily mitigated by all the other unique heroes like Diva and Mei and things like that. So it is a problem where, and the ban system doesn't necessarily change that problem. But ideally, the point of the ban system then is to encourage, and really that's the goal of the hero pools as well, is to encourage like, okay, for Blizzard and to be like, okay, these are the heroes that are problematic. These are the heroes we need to be changing. But if you're in a cycle of these heroes are problematic, but we have no replacements for them ever, and our only option to change that is to nerf them to the ground, then all you've done is just make a new cycle, which is sort of the Overwatch life cycle of balance. It's just we're not adding new options. We're just removing that option and making a new cycle. And that's
Yes.
just competing, ad infinitum forever at this point.
Regardless of how you want to do it differently, there's ways that you could have done it better. So, moving on to our mailbag, though. Last week we asked you about the divisions and where you thought everybody stood, and we saw two comments come in that we wanted to share. The first one coming in from Cross, and it's Cross 3061980. I assume that's a birthday. But Cross says, the sooner that Houston accept their destiny as
a doxed them. You just doxed them right there. Okay, sorry, go on. Sorry.
He's born in the 30th month. No, March 3rd. Oh, we'll have to wish him happy birthday next March 30th. June 30th. I can do math.
We'll send you a postcard.
We'll send you a postcard.
We'll send you a postcard.
He says the sooner Houston accept their destiny as Atlantic Chengdu, the better. And I love this comment. First of all, I'm gonna die by my love and support of Chengdu. I understand that my love and support of Chengdu is completely irrational, but damn it, I enjoy it. And even if Chengdu did kind of rein it in a little bit this week, Houston, especially with the criticisms, the time-honored criticisms from Monte Cristo himself, that Houston just needs to play what they're good at. Houston. I don't know. I'll let you take this one. Do you want to talk more about?
I mean, I think you hit the points. Really, like, there's nothing else to be said. That's like, I do think it's being generous to Houston at times to call them the Chengdu of the Atlantic Division, because there's really no one that I'm like, yeah, this guy is the Jinmu of Houston. I mean, I guess you could argue that like when Lynx was on fire on his game, he's hitting his hit scan shots. Like, okay, he's like crazy. Like, there are definitely, I don't think it's an unfair comparison. I just more think of like the absolute value of the comparison per se, because it's like, yeah, that's true. But it's also in the same way I feel that like Boston is like worse Justice, where it's like if Jerry doesn't get all the limbs, then Boston does nothing. And if it's which is exact same as Justice, where if Corey doesn't do everything, the Justice loses. But then it's also completely like negating everything else that's bad about Boston in comparison to Justice, or everything that's bad about Houston in comparison to Chengdu, right? But honestly, I do love when people simplify like complex thoughts or ideas into very nice sound bites, even if they're not totally accurate, because it's funny to say. And I gotta give some mad respect to that one. I gotta give some mad respect to that particular comment. I think it's very, very good. I think I think there was one more.
Yeah,
that we had posted, right? Where was it?
It's your turn to dox him.
Yeah, it's my turn to dox. Where did I throw this? I threw it somewhere.
I can repost it for you. It's right there.
Oh, I did. It's just very tiny. There it is. The other one was Matthew Warner, because we had also asked about the rankings, right? Because we were discussing Johnny's rankings, Reinforce's rankings at the time. And Matthew Warner said that Atlanta should have been a lot higher on those rankings because they dominated Paris 3-0, and it wasn't that close. And people still thought Paris was bad because they maybe prepped more for Toronto and things like that. And also Atlanta, from their past performance this weekend too, they had an extremely close game versus the
Very
Fusion.
close. Very close.
Like, they almost got rolled, and then they sort of almost swept, I should say. And I do have to say the defining moment of that was when they started playing Mei. I have to say they started playing
Shocker.
Mei, which is crazy. But Atlanta is in that weird spot where they have played a lot of because the Atlantic Division is just simply put bad. It's just not a good division.
It's
just not a good division. This is probably the first time ever that Atlantic has been relatively solid between Fusion, Atlanta, Wait, actually, is there anyone else really? Am I thinking about? Let me think. Eternal.
Yeah.
Eternal's not bad right now either. So it's probably the first time that I think that the Atlantic Division has, and then who knows where New York stands, is like okay-ish. So it's tough to really rate Atlanta by that. But I don't think it's unfair, Mr. Warner, to say that Atlanta should be higher because they do also have a lot of potential within them. And considering they just took Fusion to such a close series after they stopped
Yeah.
not playing May, then I think they have chances to go up.
Yeah. The bottom part of the Atlantic Division is really, really bottom. But this weekend, especially, like, Philly got the 2 wins, but against the Atlanta Reign and the Paris Eternal, both of those games went to 5 games. So they were close. And, even then, even with that, the level of Overwatch looked really quite high to the point where these 3 teams, even though they're scrapping it out amongst each other, especially with Vancouver's performance, there's an argument to be made that all of these teams are top 6 or top 5, the 3 of them. So, yeah, like, they're a good team, but,
we just have to see more, honestly. Have
Yeah.
to see more, have to see more wins too, because a win that proves them they beat, right? Beating Fusion there would have, and also, or at the very least, not having started the series where they're like getting pummeled into the dirt and then have to make a last minute adjustment because also good teams really almost never do good teams really allow themselves, like, it does happen if they're playing another good team, but do teams ever really allow themselves to get into the hole in terms of score line? They always prefer to start strong and had that advantage from the beginning versus, okay, we're going to throw 2 maps away and then have to fight our way back in a reverse sweep. Like, that's not really what good teams try to do ever.
Mhm.
And so that shows like a team that's still kind of not really knowing where its strength or its weaknesses, why, or at least not understanding the meta perfectly just yet, I feel, when I look
So,
at that.
so what are we gonna do for Mailbag next week? I know that we had talked about getting people's input on the schedule coming up this week because it is going to be Thursday through Sunday games instead of the Saturday Sunday. But almost the entire time that we've been talking, there has been a balanced conversation in chat. I specifically want to give a shout out to Rapier Man. There's been some pretty fantastic balance discussions and people having hot takes on what the balance should like, or what the balance should be like in Overwatch. So, what do you think about transitioning our question for this week to how you'd balance Overwatch if you took Jeff Kaplan's job?
Yeah, I think balance is always a hot topic in Overwatch. So there's no, and then this is a very good time to do this unification of the hero pools. So I think asking how the viewers would balance it. Now, are we just leaving it that open ended?
I think that my favorite, if we are going to get as many hot takes as possible, you're going to have to tell us your rank. We got to know.
You got to attach the rank next to it.
Yeah, you got to be like, as a bronze Mercy main, I believe that we should bring back 5-man res. So, perfect.
And we will run a background check.
Yeah, and there's a question. There's a question from 1800 in chat, says, where do we submit? So you can submit it pretty much anywhere that you actually watch this podcast. I guess you call it a podcast show,
or on YouTube, since it's
or on YouTube.
Yeah, it is technically a show. We just had to scale back from our studio since we're working at home now. But we added some nice new sponsor segments, so I feel like we're getting back to sort of getting close to back to where we were. But you can also put it on YouTube. We check the chat on YouTube. Obviously, that's where we get a lot of these comments. And I think that's really beginning the majority of them, haven't we?
Yeah, we see the comments when they happen live, whether you're watching them Twitch, Twitter, or YouTube. But the main place where you want to leave your like insightful long form comments is going to be the comment section on YouTube. And if you are watching on podcast, are there comment sections on podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple?
I'm not gonna lie, I have simply no idea. I simply have no idea. I could not tell you the information because that is the last thing I ever thought about was a live chat for podcast. Because I always thought podcasting was for people that like.
I don't think there's a live chat, but is there a comment section?
No.
Yeah, I don't know. I listen to podcasts on
pretty
Spotify,
much YouTube, or you can add us on Twitter. Add us on Twitter, or at Envy on Twitter, or whichever one, and we will find them that way too. Send me a carrier pigeon, maybe a smoke signal.
You can leave reviews on podcast.
Perfect. You could leave a review with your.
Just leave a question in the review. Perfect. That's okay.
Exactly what we've been needing there. So whichever one you want to be, the Pony Express, but that's going to be our call to action, I guess, is how would you balance Overwatch? We'll leave it open-ended. And Jayne wants to add the addendum of put your rank there too, because
we want to.
Might as well. So, and then one last thing, Super Nikio too with the live check. He says, "Can you read this?" Yes. Just to remind every people, this is a live show. This isn't pre-recorded or anything like that, and we do see the comments
when we're talking about the show. So if you do have something to say, or if you feel like we missed something, make sure you type that in your chat, regardless of whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitch, or Twitter. All of the comments, all of the chats get fed into us, and we're watching them. So if you guys do want to be a little bit more interactive or engaging, or engaged, or that seems like a really negative connotation. That sounded way better in my head. If you want to get more involved and talk to us,
I can see your forehead comments about me. Okay, guys, I can see it. Whenever you guys think I can't see the forehead comments, but I can see them, and I'm gonna start projecting the Twitch chat onto my forehead, because then you can see it play back at you. If you keep doing it, I will. I do see them. So yes, we can see your comments.
Either way, I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. That's all the time we have for. Wow, that was
tough day, huh?
Tough day. We are not coming from you. Wow, okay, I give up. Can you do the
We're
outro?
not coming live from the Frontier Communications Studio. That's going to be another episode of Contested, and tell us, like you said, about what you would do to fix Overwatch when you're ranked. This has been Contested. I am Avast. That is Jayne, and thank you guys for tuning in.